I know there's been lots of controversies about the Shroud of Turin.
Sure.
And I've never really looked at it in any depth. But I know in the Gospel reading, the Gospel of John, after Jesus has been raised from death, it talks about the grave clothes, and it talks about the different strips, and it specifically mentions the part that went round the head was found separately.
Yes.
But I presume the Turin Shroud is just one piece of
Right.
cloth.
Okay, so you're asking me about the second cloth mentioned in the New Testament. It said it was folded and separate from the other. And if you go to Spain, which isn't all that far from here, and you go to Oviedo, Spain, you on the appropriate 3 days of the year, they have a feast day where they display the sudarium of Oviedo, which has blood stains and other fluid, bodily fluids, probably pleural fluid, most likely from the lungs, but no image, because that would have been put on his body probably even while he was still on the cross after he died, and brought back and taken to the tomb, and then it was removed. And because Jewish law says if there's blood on it, it must be buried with the body, and I'm sure Muslim law is parallel to that, now that I've learned all the parallels that there are. So it had to remain in the tomb with the body, and somebody said to me, well, since the shroud is only one cloth, then it can't be real. And I said, well, you know, over 2,000 years, it is quite possible that two different cloths might have gotten a little separated from each other. And because it doesn't bear an image, it would have been of less interest to the iconoclasts that might want to destroy images. But absolutely exists, still in existence, dated back to what, 5th century is it, or so, David? 7th century. Dated back to the 7th century for sure, with an unbroken chain of custody. So we know, and the bloodstains line up with the image bloodstains on the shroud. So yes, there was a second cloth. It also mentioned the linen strips, but I talked about that earlier, that they didn't wrap the body in strips. They bound the body into the shroud using strips. And they did that when my father died as well. And I've seen that in Mideastern funerals, where they sometimes actually carry the bodies. And you can see the strips wrapped around the grave clothes. Yes, sir?
You mentioned the cloth of Oviedo.
Oviedo.
You mentioned the pleural fluid was found on that cloth. Was the analysis of the area that was where the spear,
Spear wound.
Spear, that's the word.
There you are.
The spear, where the spear was inserted into the thorax, did that find pleural fluid?
They did, and I showed you the photo of the blood serum, separating from the serum.
With the halo around
Yeah, with the halo around it. So when they said blood and water, if the man were dead, there would have already become a separation between the particulate content of the blood from the serum, which is the liquid portion. So that's one possible explanation for that. But the pleural fluid that was found on the face cloth, remember, that would have been there first. They would have moved him probably to the grave, to the tomb, with that around his head. Once they stopped moving the body around, there'd be probably less of that when he was put into the shroud.
So there wasn't much, but was there
Yeah, we didn't find as much pleural fluid on the shroud as we did on that has been found on the sudarium. And I think there's a logic to that based on the fact that that would have then been removed, kept in the tomb because of Jewish law, but separated, and then the body began to be prepared. But also remember this, the body preparation was never fully completed, at least according to the New Testament. They had to stop because of the approaching Sabbath that began at sundown. So the women were ostensibly coming back Sunday morning to finish what they had begun, because it would have violated the Sabbath to do it after sundown. So, any other questions? Yes, sir.
I have a question in regards to the face. Now, the human body is in 3D, and once you have a cloth, you put the cloth around anyone, it would give a distorted image of that.
Yes, it would. It's called wraparound distortion.
Exactly.
Right.
So, has there been any replication of that at the moment, historically,
Well,
or?
Many people have attempted to create a body, and if the image of the shroud were a sole contact image, then we would expect to find that. But I've already shown you, based on the cloth body distance separation, that it's not just a contact image. There was imaging at a distance of up to about 4 centimeters. So I think that might explain it. And the other thing is this, in the Gospels, New Testament, it talks about 100 pounds of spices and for preparation of the body. Well, they would have brought that how? They wouldn't have just poured it on the body. They would have brought it in sacks or jars. And there are no side images of the man of the shroud. Now remember, Friday evening, I'm going to get you next. Friday evening, the sundown fast approaching, where are you going to put the 100 pounds? Well, maybe you just place it around the body. We have no side images. That would have lifted the cloth away from the sides and perhaps kept it more flat, minimizing some of that distortion. There is some distortion, but it's not the dramatic wraparound distortion that would be there if it were a sole contact image. Good question. Young man.
As you mentioned in your presentation, that one that Jesus, the prophet Jesus, one of his legs were folded, and you mentioned that his hands were together like this. Does that mean look through the light image?
It was light. The light image.
Oh, what?
Does that mean he was alive?
Does it mean he was alive? Wow, you notice that no adult would dare ask me that question, knowing I'm a Jew, you're Muslims, and there's certainly some Christians in the room, and we know that that is the difference between the Christian faith and the Muslim faith. But a young lad like that is not inhibited. And so here's I'm going to give you the same answer I gave earlier in the day to some folks who were in here. And I certainly didn't come here to challenge anybody's faith, okay? I came here to basically present you with the evidence that we have on the Shroud of Turin. What it means and how you interpret it is up to you, not up to me. If you're asking my opinion, I believe that there's more evidence towards death than not. But I always leave the door open because we're studying a piece of cloth. And a piece of cloth, no matter how important and how much information is there, cannot answer every question. Okay? My personal opinion is he was probably dead. Notice how I said that. He was probably dead. But I also understand the Muslim tradition and point of view because I studied that before I came here because I didn't want to come here and be an ignorant fool. And so I understand that your belief is, and it's not just the Muslims who believe that. We have experts, Kirsten and Gruber, two German researchers. Helmut Felsman's written a whole book on that. So it's not just the Muslim point of view. There are others who believe as well that there's evidence of life. But I happen to have hung out with a couple of forensic pathologists, both who spent many, many decades studying the Shroud. They felt he was dead. And I'm an old hippie photographer. So I have to sort of rely on the experts in each discipline. So I have a tendency to lean in that direction, but I leave the door open for that possibility because we're never going to know that for a fact from the Shroud of Turin. So once again, it falls on your shoulders to interpret it based on your own beliefs. I think that's the right answer. You know, somebody came up to me in Canada and said, "You know, that was a great lecture, Mr. Schwortz, but you'll never convince me." And I looked him right in the eye and said, "What makes you think I even care what you believe? That's between you and God. Take it up with him." So some answers the Shroud cannot give us. And I think the best thing is for you to study it, to learn about it, and then decide for yourself what it means. If you go to shroud.com on the front page, 20 years ago I wrote the following words. Given the facts, I believe you have to make up your own mind about this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a lovely way to end as well. So yeah,
one
I like your
question.
interpretation of that. Yeah, so we have to wrap up now because the session's going to start shortly. But Barrie will be here again, going through the same presentation again. So those of your friends or colleagues who didn't make it today, you can come tomorrow, and he'll be here throughout the days of all 3 days. He's staying with us, so you can come and interact with him and talk to him. Pam's here. We've got David Roth. We've got a selection of Shroud experts. Hugh Farry's here. We've got Simon Brown at the back as well, kind of taking a video of this event as well. So yeah. Jazakallah, thanks everyone for attending. Great to see so many people.
Thank you. Thank you. Rule number one, take out the lens. They took that piece out, they cut it in half, put aside one half, took the other half, cut it in third, and that's all they carbon dated in 3 different labs. But nowhere else on the Shroud did they take one sample. They're on the side. And look at the size of the cloth. Yeah, it's a huge cloth.
That means the size of big cloth.
Well, no, he was around 5'10". Tall, but not.
I'm 5'11".
Yes, and he wouldn't have been any taller than you. But everybody says too tall. Or some people say. And my answer is, he was a carpenter. He couldn't go to Home Depot and buy the lumber. He had to chop down the tree and carve the lumber himself. He had pretty good upper body strength.
Most Jews, they have big shoulders.
Yeah, and you can see that. Well, look, and remember that artists always portrayed him from a low angle looking up. It makes him look.
No, I'm still skeptical. So that.
They're typical of the first century Roman names, so they're typical of their time. I mean, they're not I myself have done
सारे फोटो खींच कुछ नहीं कह रहे
ये ट्रक लेकर रात का लेके
with information that no one would have known until the 1960s.
Oh, that's so interesting. Okay.
Taking a picture for our social media while you're explaining.
Of course, yeah.
You pretend to be like
Quoting about it. Does anyone? Oh, there's another thing that's quite interesting, which is that I don't know. Okay, sorry. I don't know if you can see, but if you look at the heights of both shoulders, the shoulder on the left, as you look at that,
if it wasn't me, why aren't we discussing me this time? We're getting
steeply away. And some medical experts from Italy spent some time looking at that and discovered that
I'm coming to that very point, that what was the objective of this thing happening, this thing coming and this thing remaining so, it is extra now, and this is and the doubt. So why should be the doubt? Why, if he was to be the objective of God, who had created our world and who is running on this world, so he was to be objective for some particular purpose. Everything should be.
I don't know. You'd have to ask a theologian. I'm a scientist myself.
Really?
Yes.
Which subject?
Yeah.
Which subject?
Biology to start with. Yeah.
So we are friends.
Would you please
Oh yeah. Sorry.
correlate the pictures with the events?
Yes, the biblical events. What we see here then, from start to finish, is what people would think of as a story of the whole of the Passion of Christ. So, if we like to begin with Christ being arrested and taken before the Jewish court, and he may have been hit, and there are examples of perhaps here you can see that the cheek here has got sort of 2 bumps on it, whereas here it's only got 1 bump. So these may be contusions, there may be severe bruises and things like that.
He was a relationship of the crown of
Yeah.
flogging
So
and
after being hit and just beaten up, the next thing that happened to him was that Pilate condemned him to be flogged. So we've got the marks of the flogging all down the back here. If you imagine being flogged with one of these, all right, then as these things land on you, they make these little.
is that left?
Yeah. I mean, this is not a terribly good reconstruction, but anyway, so these little marks, and they produce these dumbbell shapes. You see, you've got 2 big marks and a kind of light bit shading in. So that's the sort of thing, flogged from 2 sides, because we can see some of the marks are facing this way, and some of the marks are going that way. So two scourges, 2 angles, and down here, the person from this side was particularly mean because he went for the legs. So it tells a whole story. You can see how even some people have, by drawing the angles of the connecting the lines, you can see how high the man was, where his whipping stance was. Anyway, so the next thing is then the crowning with thorns, and we've got blood marks dribbling down the back of the head here and the front of the head here. So that's the torture that he had. And then he was given the cross to carry, and some people think they can see big contusions on the shoulder. Whether he was carrying the whole cross, which some people think, or just the crossbar, which others think, there seem to be contusions across the back here.
This is not the one Shroud of Turin.
It's a photograph of it, yes. It's a photograph of the same as that. This was taken with the angle of the light deliberately at a sharp angle so that you could see the creases better, because some people thought that the creases would show you how it was folded up in distant times.
Does it bear the facial impression? This one.
It's nearly always shown with these 2 little sort of patches at the top, so the facial impression is this side. So we've had the beating up, scourging, crowning with thorns, taken up to Calvary, where we get nails through the hands and
These nails are perhaps
similar. These are from Scotland. These are real nails, but they're from.
These could be called the replicas.
No, they're original, but they're from a Roman fort in Scotland. They're not from the Middle East.
I mean, these are of the same period.
Yes. Yeah.
Is this the Turin Shroud?
Can you period
Or replica?
Yeah. What, this?
Yeah.
No, this is a photograph of the real thing.
A photograph of the Turin,
Yes.
Shroud of Turin.
Yes, this one was taken in 1938. Right. That one was taken in 1978. And modern ones are taken in 2002.
Which one is better?
The best one is I think probably Barrie's one, because he was a very professional photographer. But for a really good, if you want to study it in close, if any of you got an iPad, if you look up Shroud 2.0, you can look at the shroud in so great detail that you can see every single stitch.
Shroud 2.0.
Yeah, Shroud 2.0 by haltadefinizioni.com.
So now what about there is the 2.0 used there. One say that very whole was so that was already there and he was angry.
Many like movies about here, but then they feel insulted. Then I go, let's go talk.
Barrie's website, anything that you're interested in, find blood flow, and then you get a whole list of things about that.
Which was it again? Sorry.
I could not recall the author. I was not thinking of the new, otherwise I had this Shroud of Turin.
Having trouble hearing.
Shroud of Turin.
That's how we like it best.
Turin, yeah. Oh, Ian Wilson. Ian Wilson.
It doesn't seem to have any substance on it. All it is the fibres themselves degrading. If there was a substance on it, that substance has either been removed or has fallen off.
I've got a picture of it. I'll bring it in my phone. I've got a picture of the image, and you can see the corrosion.
What about that? Scientific words.
Yeah, that's the blood. The blood. So it's a detail of it.
So you have not
It's like this cotton.
And he found any great quantity came from the stupid white cotton gloves we were wearing, but it was all and that makes it for everything.
The first century, cloth as well.
what is the opinion of Methodists?
Sorry? Methodists?
That's fine.
Across here, can you see that? Then the legs come down here. So on the face, what we can see is various things. If you look at this, you can see it a bit more clearly. Can you see the light shoot? Can you see above the head, there's what looks like some blood that goes down there. On this image, blood shows white. These marks here, like a number 3.
We did something called pyrolysis mass spectrometry. Can detect 1 part per billion. Now, in those days, there was no internet, no computers for us to use. So what did we do? The guys at Los Alamos National Laboratory, you might have heard of them, they invented the first atomic bomb. They did. The one that was dropped in Hiroshima, that's where it came from. So they're pretty smart guys over there. So the pyrolysis mass spectrometry didn't find anything, and how do we know this? So the guys at Los Alamos put together a database of the spectral characteristics of every paint, pigment, and binder known to man from medieval to modern times. And now we have a graph that shows what all these different things would be. A graph for each different particular paint, pigment, dye, whatever. And we looked all over the Shroud, and we didn't find any. 0. There was no paint, pigments, or binders on the Shroud of Turin. There were a few particles of red iron oxide, which is something that is used as an ingredient of an artist's pigment called red ochre. only problem is it was never used in its pure form, but always mixed with cobalt or manganese, or sometimes both, because it made it a better artist pigment when they mixed it with an oil or water-based paint. I wasn't sure which, but not an expert on paints. So with that information, we could look across the entire shroud and realize that we found zero of any of these compounds, pretty much eliminating painting as one of the possibilities. Now, one of the other theories was photography. Maybe it was a photograph. It certainly has one property like a photograph. The lights and darks of the image are reversed, just like on a photographic negative. Now, I'm going to say this to you. I was lecturing to 10-year-olds a year or so ago, and I mentioned film. And a 10-year-old boy put his hand up and he said, "Excuse me, Mr. Schwortz, film, is that a USB device?" Now I felt old, because 10-year-olds, and some of you might not be too much older than that yourselves, I don't know, but 10-year-olds, in their lifetime, film's been gone. Nobody knows what film is anymore. They only know digital. In these days, in the earlier days, 20 years ago, and earlier than that, it was always film. So, we eliminated painting. We eliminated that. Photography requires a light-sensitive material. And the most light-sensitive material used photographically since the invention of photography is silver. There was also a thought that perhaps the holes that are burnt into the cloth by the fire in 1532, where all these patches are in this image, that they might have been the result of molten silver from the reliquary, the box in which it was stored. The problem is, the inside of the box was wood, the outside of the box was covered with silver, so the thought was maybe the silver melted, because silver has a relatively low melting point. So we started looking for silver. So we had the spectral characteristics of silver, and we looked for silver. Now, we looked not just around the burn holes, but we looked all over the shroud. And it's a good thing we did, because a few years, some years after we came back, somebody right from here in the UK, as a matter of fact, Lynn Picknett and Clive Prince came out with the theory that, yeah, the shroud isn't a painting. They agreed it wasn't a painting because they saw the evidence we brought it that it wasn't. They said, no, it's not a painting. Actually, it's a photo made by Leonardo da Vinci. And they wrote a book called Leonardo Did It or something. As a matter of fact, that's why I built Shroud.com. I got a phone call from a friend of mine. He said, you know that shroud thing you're involved with? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, you know, it's just a photo made by Leonardo da Vinci. And I laughed because I thought he was joking. And I said, where did you get that information? Now, I don't know about how it is here, but in America, when you go to the supermarket and you buy your groceries and you go to pay at the checkout counter, that's where all the tabloids are. So I said, where did you get your information? He said, well, my wife and I were at the supermarket, and it was on one of the tabloids. And I had an epiphany at that moment. I realized, here I am. I was a member of the team. I was there. I collected the data. I made the photographs. I've been archiving this stuff for years. And I realized the general public doesn't read peer-reviewed journals. And that's when I got the idea, consider building a website. I wrote on a little folder on my desk. And that was the genesis of Shroud.com, which is turning 20 in January. So it's been there a while on the internet. And anyway, so back to the silver. When Picknett and Prince came out with their theory of Leonardo da Vinci, and this guy said this to me, and I asked him where he got the information, I pointed out to him that the shroud is documented being on public display 100 or so years before Leonardo was born. Now, he was a good artist, but he wasn't that good. I mean, that's kind of a ludicrous theory. But at least they accepted it wasn't a painting. So anyway, we look all over the shroud, and you need some silver. And then a gentleman from South Africa, Nicholas Allen, who's an art historian, he took it to the next step. Nicholas Allen got himself a statue of a man, coated a piece of linen with a light-sensitive silver emulsion, hung his statue in front of that using a camera obscura, which is just a dark room with a little hole at the end, which acts like a lens and focuses what's outside onto the piece of cloth. And he actually created an image on linen using a camera obscura and said, this is how the shroud was done. So Picknett and Prince sort of adopted that. The only problem with Nicholas Allen's theory is he never took his result. And by the way, it took 4 days for the body to hang there, according to Nicholas Allen, to create the exposure necessary to see it on the cloth. Now, we're talking the Mideast here. In Jerusalem, you ever been there? It's pretty warm. If you hang a body for 4 days, it may start looking like a body at the beginning. But at the end of 4 days, it's going to, I don't even want to suggest what it might look like, kind of a pile of ugly, smelly stuff. And it's not going to look the same at the end of that 4 days as at the beginning. Nicholas Allen made it work because he used a statue, which doesn't change. But a human body can't be hung in the sun for 4 days and not change its shape dramatically. So this whole theory of, and the other thing Nicholas Allen didn't do, he did not take the result that he created and put it next to a photograph of the shroud to make a comparison of the two. It sort of looked like the shroud, so he said, see, I did it. Well, the good news is, I wrote an article challenging Nicholas Allen, and it's in the Review of Religions, most recently in the last issue this past May. So you could go right to the Review of Religions and read my disputing Nicholas Allen. And then, of course, the CNN did a documentary, and they brought Nicholas Allen back out of the closet after 15 years of my having disputed and proven that he was wrong by showing the evidence, because it makes a great video, you know. It looks cool when they go in the dark room and make an image. And, you know, they're documentary filmmakers. They're not looking to tell you the truth. They're looking to entertain you, folks. That's why I tell people, don't use documentaries as a place to study the shroud, or you're going to be filled with false information. So anyway, so Nicholas Allen did that. I sort of chastised him and put his image side by side with the shroud and pointed out all the differences. And once I point out the differences, you're going to see that, yeah, it kind of looks like the shroud, but it's not anything like the same chemistry or physics as the shroud. And after the CNN documentary came out, I wrote a follow-up article because I was so upset that they dusted off his old theory and put it on television again. And guess what? The May issue of Review of Religions has that article too. So if you really want to know why it's not a photograph, I can recommend Review of Religions as a place to go read those 2 articles and all the photographs that go with it. So that was the other thing. And the other theory that was about the shroud that we disproved was that they said it was a scorch. And you know, if you look at the burns and scorches up on there, especially at the edges of them, yeah, it's about the same kind of tonal color as the image that's on the cloth. So you can understand, because there was another skeptic who said, oh yeah, somebody just took a metal statue and heated it up and scorched it onto the cloth. Frankly, I'd like to see that statue, because it must have been a really beautiful piece of artwork. And here's the other problem with that. We did something called ultraviolet fluorescence photography, or UV fluorescence we call it. Basically, we direct a certain wavelength of light at the cloth that causes the cloth to fluoresce in certain wavelengths, and with filters over the lens, we only recorded the fluorescence of the cloth. It turns out that heated, scorched linen, which we have plenty of authentic, we know the exact day of the fire, so we have all the documentation of when the scorches got on the shroud. And when you heat the cloth and you then look at it with UV fluorescence photography, any place where a high temperature effect has occurred, it fluoresces in the red. So it looks kind of reddish around the peripheral of all these scorches. And the background of the cloth has its own fluorescence in kind of a yellow-green. So if the image on the shroud itself were made by high temperature, it would fluoresce, wouldn't it? You see the logic? That's called science. That's the logic of it. So we photographed the entire shroud with ultraviolet fluorescence photography, and guess what? Not only did the image not fluoresce, it even quenched the fluorescence of the background. The image on the shroud is not the product of a high temperature event. Simple as that. Well, maybe it's not that simple, but I tried to make it as simple as I can. So the 3 big reasons that we thought might be the cause of the image on the shroud, our team brought back the data that's published in peer-reviewed scientific journals that says it's not a painting, it's not a Schwortz, and it's not a photograph. Okay? Can you take it from here? Okay.
I don't know how you follow that. That's brilliant. Well done. And years of experience, 40 years as an expert on the shroud. It's a real privilege.
Well, let me just add one.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm not a Christian, and I'm not a Muslim. I'm a Jew. Just like the man on the shroud. And I thought I should have had that at the end there, so you understand that when I came into this, I didn't have an emotional attachment to Jesus. The only thing I knew is he was one of our boys. Okay? So just understand, it took me 20 years after examining it in person before the evidence accumulated to a point where I became convinced of its authenticity. And I said this earlier today, so what's a Jewish guy getting involved with this for? Because at the beginning I said no. And at the end I realized it's kind of funny how God seems to always pick a Jew to be the messenger. And I'm just a messenger. Thank you.
Has anyone got any questions? Has anyone got questions?
I think that was quite comprehensive. Thank you very much.